Johnny Gabriel, he's Vice President of Software Solutions and Strategy at Nexius. He's here to tell us how management, operations, configuration, and planning for next generation networks may be changing as we move towards software-based systems. Nexius is unique in combining technology services, software and network engineering, and also deployment for the communications technology ecosystem. And Johnny, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Abe.
Well, thanks for being here. And I want to get into a number of areas as far as network functions virtualization. Before I do, I want to recognize a recent award that you received, or that Nexius received. It was AT&T's 2016 Supplier Award. Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. So like you mentioned, we have a history of being a comprehensive provider for our customers, including technology services, software services, network engineering, and deployment. And all that has a core of automation that we've always focused on at Nexius. And it came together, with the focus also and emphasis on excellence in delivery that translated into this award from AT&T that we're very, very proud of. It all came basically together by us sort of focusing on improving our services, whether internally or providing the best tools we can to our customers. And we're very happy to be in this position today.
Now, of course, a lot of changes, as I mentioned in the introduction, as far as best practices and processes pertaining to management, operations, configuration, and planning as we go from this hardware-based system to really an entirely software-based system, or at least primarily. Tell us, or sort of walk us through those changes.
Absolutely. So the first thing we want to look at is why this transformation is happening, right? Over the past 2 decades, we all know that the data that's going through these telecom operators has been absolutely enormous, and it's exploded. And the traditional mode of simply providing larger appliances, beefier custom silicone, is just not keeping up with that trend of innovation that needs to happen. So moving to a software-defined network does one very specific thing, that it separates the software from the hardware. And it allows us to go through 2 separate paths of innovation. And what that does is it really changes the dynamic of when you're providing upgraded services, rolling out new services. All of that can happen much more quickly. But what this does also is it has changed the mode of how you operate these networks, as you mentioned, the management configuration. And more specifically, one of the key changes that takes place is that now these networks are fungible. And this is a very key word when it comes to NFV. And essentially what's taking place is that we are no longer dependent on the availability of a specific component. What we're to be able to do now at any given time, if there's, let's say, an error on the network core or an outage, you can literally just reinstantiate, whether in the same physical location or separate, and redirect traffic accordingly. Now, at the same time, what that does is it provides a very unique challenge, which is the science and procedures that have to be implemented to support these kinds of changes and automated modifications within the network. These have to be developed by us, by the operators and their partners and their vendors, which includes Nexius. So developing the right software and developing the right algorithms and the science behind all of this is very, very challenging, but it's also a huge opportunity for us to overcome. And that basically brings us into a very different cultural and operational model when we're taking care of very highly available, resilient, and redundant networks. So what that does for us is that it changes the culture where we're very agile, we're very focused on being able to not just adapt and react, but also innovate and change as these services start going into the market.
Johnny, I want to talk further about some of these opportunities and challenges that you talk about. I want to stick with network functions virtualization, but really specifically about open source and NFV, but also big data analytics, challenges and opportunities.
I see a huge opportunity for us to do great things in these spaces. So open source, essentially, the value of open source has been the community, right? It's not just access to source code. And what this means is that the proprietary software path from the past no longer can satisfy the pace and the complexity of innovation that needs to happen. When you have a massive community of collaborators, whether it's the operators among themselves or even introducing other players in the industry from the data center world, software providers like Microsoft and Google and Facebook, and all of these contributing to this community, it really accelerates the pace of innovation and allows us to do much greater things. At the same time, the fact that it's a software network really changes the way we look at analytics in general and how we instrument these technologies. And what this means is that we're no longer limited to the traditional mode of where you had the appliance and we collected data and analyzed it after the fact. And then we hoped for the best case scenario was a near real-time loop. This no longer has to be the case. we can actually instrument VNFs and management and orchestration layers so that the analytics are embedded within them directly. And this gives us true automated, if not autonomous networks that can self-correct, self-improve, and dynamically create new provisioning, come back to life after errors and outages. All of that can now be instrumented within the network itself.
I want to find out what the sort of correlation, if I may say that, or relationship between your company and the open source project, or I'm sorry, the Open Compute project.
Absolutely. So the Open Compute project really extends our focus and philosophy of open source. One thing to keep in mind is that now that we're moving towards software-defined networks on commodity hardware and white box networking, this really changes the dynamic in terms of giving us massive, massive opportunities to do great things, but it's also providing the challenge whereby the network operators and their partners like us are now responsible also for the efficiency of the hardware, the underlying hardware. You know, before when you bought an appliance, there was set parameters and set expectations that you get from the vendor in terms of how the performance need to be. Now with elastic and scalable and fungible networks, this no longer is the case, and it's completely a function of the innovation that you're developing within your network components, your orchestration layer, your VNFs, all of that plays into it. If we take a look, for example, some of the participants in OCP, Microsoft, for example, was able to see 40% in cost reduction on their Azure cloud simply by optimizing their hardware for Windows Server. Facebook has seen over $1 billion in savings over 3 years from OCP. And when we look at big operators, for example, at AT&T, that run over 100 petabytes of traffic within their mobile network every day, the scale of this data is absolutely massive. And then small improvements would have massive economies of scale in terms of the cost reductions, improvements in efficiency, resiliency, and redundancy. So what the OCP project does for us is it allows us to be, like I said, the two paths of innovation, both software and hardware. We want to be on both ends. And we want to help our customers and our partners in order to take that end-to-end view just like we do today and continue to contribute to innovations across the board. You know, Nexius is a top-tier member of OCP, but we're also a founding member of the Telecommunications Infrastructure Project, which is an offshoot of OCP that focuses specifically on the use cases for telecommunications operators. And just to give you some examples of what's happening, we're seeing, for example, some contributors developing edge compute nodes specifically for telecom operators to support IoT use cases, for example. And these are dramatic changes in the way we're viewing how to manage and operate networks and also how to push them forward to satisfy new use cases that the traditional mode of networking simply cannot support.
Johnny, it's good to see how Nexius really found its place, and a very visible place, by the way, in the network industry. I know you guys have been around for quite some time, but really, again, visible at this point. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much, Abe. Pleasure.